All right. Okay. So, hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Conversations from the Trenches. And today we are going to be talking about a really fascinating topic. I have to say, this is a topic very, very close to my heart, which is about perfectionism. But, there's so much said about perfectionism. And I think in a lot of ways, we live in a kind of a paradoxical world because as people, as children, when we were growing up, and even now as adults in our day-to-day lives, we are consciously and unconsciously held to perfectionism by ourselves, by the people around us, and there's a lot of pressure on us. And in very unsaid ways and unseen ways, perfectionism is very closely perceived as being related to achievement and to
Mhm,
excellence,
mhm,
right? But at the same time, at the other end of the spectrum, we have a lot of conversation about how toxic perfectionism is and how
mhm,
perfectionism actually limits us from progressing. So what's the real deal? What's the in between line? Does perfectionism deserve the bad press that it receives all over
mhm,
all over social media or in thought leadership? Is there a balance that we can achieve? Is there really a connection between perfectionism and achievement or performance? And how do we debug, how do we change our mindset towards perfectionism? This is what we are going to be talking about, exploring, and I have with me somebody who is, I think, a brilliant brain person. uh, this is Kelly Nowocien, who is joining us all the way from France. Kelly is a life coach and a neurolanguage coach who specializes in supporting leaders, entrepreneurs, professionals, anybody in a leadership role to transform their communication skills and their life skills by changing their mindset. So now you get where I come in from the brain stuff, right? There's nothing wishy washy about what Kelly does. It's really about rewiring and rejigging your brain to achieve those mindsets that will support us thriving and flourishing. So, welcome, Kelly. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, my dear Rekha. Lovely to be here.
So, is there, can I invite you to share a little bit more about yourself with the audience and the viewers, considering that this is the first time they're seeing you on my talk show?
Yes. Well, I mean, you presented the everything perfectly. You explained what I do. I'm British born, but I've been in France for about 25 years, and I run my own business. I worked in a corporate role for many years on the French Riviera, and then I changed lifestyle and sort of a healthier high performance, if we could say it like that, in
Mm-hmm.
in the countryside in the middle of the Pyrenees in France. So that's where I am
Oh,
now.
oh, lovely. I've been to the Pyrenees as a child. It's a beautiful,
Oh,
beautiful
right. I
state.
didn't know that. Great.
Well, as a
It is
kid,
lovely.
as a kid, as a kid. I I don't remember much about it except the mountain goats. That's all I
Yeah.
remember.
Skipping down the hills.
Yeah, skipping down the hills, exactly. Yeah. But anyway, thank you once again, Kelly, for joining us. This is such an important conversation for us to have, and I'm
Mm,
just grateful that you're here to help us unpack this. So I want to start off, Kelly, by taking that topic head on,
mhm.
because as I said, perfectionism has received a lot of bad press. We
Yeah.
have such, when we look at the hashtag progress over perfectionism, or perfectionism is overrated, right? The
Mhm,
amount of traction those hashtags have is incredible in the social world. Not only that, in the context of leadership, in the context of well-being, in the context of performance, right?
mhm. Yeah.
Particularly in the context of women at work, there is a lot of conversation going on about how we need to really embrace flossom and forget about perfectionism
Mhm,
because it hampers us from moving forward.
mhm.
But at the other side, we still have people who are struggling because they see perfectionism as synonymous with excellence and mastery, which is necessary for being a high performer.
Mhm.
So what I'm curious to know is, what do you think about perfectionism? Does it receive the flack that it receives? I mean, does it deserve the flack that it
Does it
receives?
does it deserve it? Good question. Um, I used to give it flack, I'll be honest.
Okay.
But when I've sort of changed I flipped the switch a bit in that sense because I realized it wasn't working for me.
Mhm.
Because when I learned more about how my brain worked, I
Mhm.
realized that what I was focused on, what I was resisting was
Mhm.
persisting. That we hear that, don't we? And
Yeah.
so what I was sort of constantly focused on, not wanting, then it was
Mhm.
staying there. So
Mhm.
what I found was a lot healthier for me was to see perfectionism as something neutral.
Mhm.
It sounds strange saying like that, but yeah. Okay, so if we see it
Mhm.
as a neutral thing, it's
Mhm.
neither good nor bad, if we can try to sort of see it like that. A bit like
Mhm.
roller coasters and vegetable soup. Some people love them, some people hate them, some people, they serve you or they don't. But
Yeah.
that's that. If we can see it like that, and we're
Right.
leaving from that neutral ground, where
Yeah.
we're not loving it, we're not hating it. Okay.
We're not obsessing about it.
Exactly, because
Right.
I mean, I don't need to go into too much detail, but the security guard in our brain is always looking for the things we're focusing on, the things that we think are relevant, and so it's just going to keep bringing more of the perfectionism instincts in there if that's what we're focusing on.
No, Kelly, please go into a little more detail. Tell us about the bonds. And let me explain why, because I think there's a lot of conversation about perfectionism. Okay, and I think for a lot of people, the struggle lies in not understanding that it's about your neural pathways. It's
Yeah.
about understanding how your brain is working and how your brain is responding to things. And it has been trained to respond in a certain way. And just as you can learn to do something, you can also unlearn to do it. But to
Exactly.
unlearn, we need to understand how it works. We need to know the process. So please do tell us a little bit more about the brainy stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll just say it very simply. As I said, we have this reticular activating system,
Hmm.
which I call the security guard. And so, what does there's so much information that comes into our senses every day. Where the
Hmm.
brain has to filter it for us through the security guard. And
Right.
so it will be, what does it focus on?
Hmm.
It focuses on relevant information. And
Yeah.
relevant information for the brain is the
Hmm.
things that we consider unconsciously to be important,
Hmm.
basically the things we're focusing on, our
Yeah.
deep beliefs, the rules we have for ourselves, things like that. Okay, so
Right.
if we focus too much on this whole resistance of like perfectionism,
Hmm.
then that's basically what we'll be seeing generally every day. So
Right.
it's sort of just, as I said, it keep coming back to that neutral ground. And sort
Right.
of realizing that perfectionist thoughts, that I said, that they're like genes, they come in all shapes and sizes, you know
Right.
and
Right.
so the question more to ask is, well, what effect is perfectionism having on my life?
Yeah.
On sort of what do I choose to do about it?
Yeah.
What is it serving me or not? I think
Yeah.
that if we can get to that sort of more neutral ground rather
Yeah.
than focusing on the flack.
Right. No, that's very interesting because I think one of the challenges we have in understanding and working with perfectionism is the fact that it's never enough.
Hmm.
It seems perfect one moment, but I mean, I'll take a very simple example of us writing a post, right?
Yeah.
You write a post, you hit post, you hit the post button. The post is out there. Now people are
Mm.
responding to it, there are action, but you go back and look at it, and suddenly you see everything that's wrong with it, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, that's something that I know from personal experience. I've had to often hold myself down and say, let it be. Stop looking at it.
Yeah.
Oh, Darren's here. How wonderful. Hi, Darren.
Oh, the
Thank
dads.
you. Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. Because
Good to
yes,
see you.
ladies. Yeah, Darren's been on the talk show before too. So yeah, so I completely get where you're at. And you mentioned about your own journey, right?
Hmm.
And I have on occasion heard you refer to yourself as a recovering perfectionist, and that intrigued me. In fact, that was the reason why I asked you. I said, I have to get Kelly to talk about this, about
Yeah.
perfectionism. So, can I invite you to share a little bit more about your journey as a perfectionist and why you felt it was important for you to recover?
Yeah. You're right. I have called myself a recovering perfectionist before.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really a term I love to use, mainly for two things, because it sort of like makes me, it's that's the label, this is who I
Yeah.
am.
Yeah.
That's the thing I don't really like, and it feels very dramatic as well. I'm just coming out of rehab. So I prefer to sort of move away from that now. But it is the term that we tend to use to
Yeah.
describe the process. We're sort of aware of something. We're aware that something isn't working, and we're
Yeah.
working on it. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
idea I wanted to give in using it. So yeah, so my journey,
Mm-hmm.
um, I sort of I could probably say that perfectionism came out in two main areas.
Mm-hmm.
First, when I was working in a corporate role a number of
Yeah.
years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and I really great company, great team, everything like that. But it's a very, very busy role.
Mm-hmm.
And I had, unknown to me really, these huge expectations of myself.
Yeah.
I wanted to get to the bottom of that work pile.
Yeah.
There was just more coming in every day,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people know.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to be able to show that I could handle everything, accept everything with a smile, never any problem. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously that, I mean, I was achieving a high performance,
Yeah.
but it came with a cost, obviously,
Yeah.
with the long hours and sort of work
Yeah.
running into weekends and things like that. So
Yeah.
that was sort of the high expectation side of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then still didn't know I was a perfectionist then. And then it was only when I became an entrepreneur that I
Mm-hmm.
realized,
Yeah.
but not at first. It
Mm-hmm.
was um, it was probably only after about a few years,
Mm-hmm.
and I just sort of thought, well, I've got clients, but I'm not really where I want to be. I'm not getting the results I want. What sort of why is
Mm-hmm.
that? I feel like I'm doing everything, doing everything I thought I should be. But in
Mm-hmm.
fact, when I learned more about how my brain works and my mindset and why I do what I do, I realized that I was doing none of the uncomfortable things. I was
Okay.
creating websites, writing blog articles, putting them out on the websites, and sort of doing all these things, but all really passive, very passive actions.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't getting out there and sort of really basically getting comfortable with feeling uncomfortable. That's the best way I could say it. I was avoiding those
Yeah.
feelings. I didn't realize this at the time, of course. It was only
Yeah.
afterwards when I learned a bit more that sort of with hindsight, maybe I'm a bit of a perfectionist, or maybe, I've got these perfectionist thought patterns.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you've raised a very valid point over here, and I think this is very pertinent for a number of women who are juggling multiple roles, and particularly at work. And
Hmm.
the fact of it is, we are so focused on delivering perfect results and perfect outcomes that we don't realize that we are completely numb to the moment. We're not experiencing the feelings that we really want to feel, which is probably why we are working, probably why we are doing the things that we are doing. So
Yeah,
it's kind of a vicious circle, isn't it?
totally. Yeah, yeah.
So I have a question for you, since we're both women sitting here talking about, we've had very similar career paths. We've talked about it. We've talked about how challenging our perfectionist bug has been for us.
Hmm.
Do you think women are more vulnerable to perfectionism?
I th- I mean, I don't like to make generalizations, really, but yeah, I think so. Yes.
Oh,
Um, I think it's probably from an early age, when we play with our little dolls. I mean, we make them all pretty and things like that, and we with society sort of growing up in this sort of mold where
yeah, yeah,
often as girls we're encouraged to please and be
yeah,
nice and not offend and be polite and all these things. And I think it's sort of it's not like we realize we're doing it, but that
yeah,
contributes, doesn't it? And then
yeah,
with the whole maternity, where we're sort of trying to juggle the roles and often
yeah,
trying to be the perfect mother
yeah,
and the perfect employee or entrepreneur and everything.
yeah,
So yeah, I do think that it is quite women are vulnerable to it in certain
yeah.
ways, definitely. Yeah.
I know a lot of speakers say this on when they come on to chat, that they don't like to generalize, and I see the merit in it. But at the same time, I think it's very important for us to also call things out for what it is.
Mm,
And the fact of it is, I know men and women are held to standards, and these are
mhm.
very oppressive standards for us at a human level because every human being is different. But at the same time, women, particularly at the workforce, are navigating landscapes that aren't built for women, which doesn't
Yeah.
factor women's roles, women's needs in it. And therefore, a lot of what we don't want to get into because we think we're generalizing are
Mhm.
harsh realities of that landscape. And sometimes we have to just say it as it is.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's true. In terms of men, I think that there is sort of it's coming more out into the open about men being prone to a certain level of perfectionism. But I'm just
Yeah,
thinking of even of sort of like the tough guy image who can't sort of show the real feelings. But I
yeah,
agree. Yes,
yeah.
as Darren's saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Darren, I'm sending you a lot of love. I really love the fact that you're being this one man cheer, lead cheer person for both of us. Thank you. Yeah, so we have more men jumping in to say agreed. And
Mhm.
I agree with you. I think the fact of it is when we talk about work and we talk about perfectionism in the work context. I mean, I'm not even
Mhm.
going into the other roles,
Yeah,
maternity and all of it, because that's a rabbit hole. I'm not going down that
exactly.
role at all. But at the workspace, the reality is that the standards that men are held to are very different to the standards that women are held to. And
Mhm.
for the women, it goes down to the work that you're producing. It's about the optics of it. You have to keep on, showing that you are good at what you're doing over and over again. It's not
Mhm.
enough that you show it the first time. You have to keep showing it. And one slip up is what it takes to
Mhm.
take you right down the ladder and start ground up again, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So Darren says it's very difficult for women to achieve this equality while those at the top of the companies are largely middle-aged white men. Well, in India, Darren, we have just men, middle-aged men. But I see your point. Thank you so much for weighing in. I agree completely with
Mm.
you, and I think this is where women need to start having conversations, and we need men to join us because ultimately this is about people against the system, and if the system changes, everybody benefits at the end of the day,
Totally, yeah. Mm.
right? So I want to deep dive a little bit more into perfectionism, and since you said it's neutral, right? Look at it as a neutral from a neutral perspective. Why and at what point does perfectionism become limiting for us or even toxic for us at a
Mhm.
granular level?
Mhm. Mhm.
Right? Like we need to know when it gets toxic for us, for those who are not in the neutral gear.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe if we can sort of look at that from thoughts, sort of feelings, behaviors, because it's sort of awareness is key, isn't it? So if we've got these ingrained thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
we're not it's not necessarily in my case in any case it wasn't the words in my head weren't saying you need to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like this background music where
Mm-hmm.
everything should be better. You should be
Yeah.
better or something else should be better. So that's
Yeah.
something to be aware of.
Mm-hmm.
What are those thoughts creating? They're creating the feelings that we know, the worry, the anxiety, the
Mm-hmm.
shame and guilt, all
Mm-hmm.
those feelings, the
Right.
confusion, everything
Yeah.
associated. And sort of what's that making us do? It's
Right.
those perfectionist behaviors of
Right.
procrastination,
Yeah.
people pleasing, saying
Yeah.
yes to everything. So it's
Yeah.
sort of like being aware. Well, what are the behaviors,
Hmm.
and sort of being able to understand that, and follow
Yeah.
that process. It's the awareness of that we sort of
Yeah.
realize, you know,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
like,
Something that strikes me was I didn't realize I was a perfectionist for a very long time in my
mm,
career. And I've actually taken some incredible risks in my career. Like I would go out and do work. I would go into the city when there were riots happening without worrying about my safety because the job had to be done.
mm,
And I think for me, when in retrospect, I realized that my goodness, I actually compromised my safety, my physical safety by
mm,
venturing into, a town that was under curfew just to get the job done because in my head, it had to be done and it had to be done right. There was no scope for
mm,
error at all. For me, that was a very big red flag. And,
Putting yourself at risk. I see what you mean. Yeah. Um, so it's the stress. Well, it's the stress levels, isn't it? It's also that, yeah, what you were saying, the physical things that you're actually doing, but it's also the possible health effects that it has on our body as well, isn't it? The fatigue, the cortisol, the aches and pains, all these things that are the side effects of those emotions that we feel.
and if you're at risk for, with with a mental well-being condition like I have anxiety, it, you are setting yourself up for failure
Yeah.
just by being a perfectionist, because you're constantly in that cycle of, you're constantly spiraling and then you're collapsing. So it is, perfectionism does have multiple, multiple uh, effects
Mhm.
on various aspects of our life. Do you want to share a little bit more about perfectionism and emotional and mental well-being?
Yeah, well, I mean, sort of the thing to think about here is when we're in perfectionism, we're sort of we're focusing on just trying to be better all the time.
Hmm.
So how can we? The idea is to move through those feelings and those
Right,
thoughts.
right.
And so we're going to sort of have to look at those. It's a I'd say it's a three-step process:
Okay.
awareness,
Mm-hmm.
and then, as you said before,
Mm-hmm.
unlearning and learning.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So the awareness of what do we need to be aware of? We need to be
Mm-hmm.
aware of the fact that it's not us. Okay, because
Yeah.
often we're thinking I am the perfectionist, as we were saying before.
Mm-hmm.
It's a thought pattern we have. It's a
Mm-hmm.
habit. And
Mm-hmm.
it's just a habit that we have, and like any
Mm-hmm.
habit, we can change it. So
Yeah.
just having that awareness already
Mm-hmm.
brings, I don't know how you feel when you think that, but it's sort of like, whew, the
Yeah.
sort of the pressure off the shoulders,
Yeah.
it can be changed sort of thing. And then that's what, then we move into the process. Okay, neural
Mm-hmm.
pathways. How do we start changing habits in our brain? And that's
Mm-hmm.
when we move into it. But that getting that sort of emotional neutral ground first,
Mm-hmm.
as
Mm-hmm.
we spoke about before, of
Mm-hmm.
awareness. I'd say we'd start there. I don't know if I've answered your question really, Rekha. Tell me if not.
Doesn't matter. We'll just keep the conversation flowing.
Hmm.
It's a chat, so it doesn't
Yeah.
matter. Right. I love the conversations that are there's literally a whole conversation unfolding on the feed. Darren's put in this really fantastic conversation a comment which I love, which is a little bit more love, compassion, listening, and understanding between all of us as human beings goes a long way.
Mm.
Absolutely. Shanti, thank
Yeah.
you very much for all your weigh-ins. It's fabulous what you're sharing. I agree with you on a number of things. And as you can see, we are kind of flashing those comments. Darren says he's got to leave. Stop being so damn engaging. Sorry, Darren, we can't help it. That's how we are. Right. So I have to ask you, Kelly, not everybody is in that state of awareness, right?
Mm.
So what would be a red flag for someone who's a perfectionist, someone who's listening to this conversation, someone
Yeah.
who wants to be, it's not even about perfectionism, someone
Mhm.
who wants to be more at peace, more joyful, experiencing life in a more deeper way, what would be the red flag for them about, that this is perfectionism. I'm being a perfectionist and I need to help myself right now. What's
Yeah.
a red flag?
Yeah. Well, I think that there's a few red flags. The first would be the sort of, as I mentioned before, the stress level we're feeling on a
Mm-hmm.
daily basis. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's having a sort of a scale that we say, okay, 0 to 10.
Mm-hmm.
What's my general stress level, and sort of
Mm-hmm.
following that. If I'm above a 7, maybe
Mm-hmm.
I need to be sort of like just bringing myself back, calming myself down. So that would be just a very simple thing for the stress level. In
Right.
general, I think we can just be looking at our results,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Okay.
because often when we're not where we want to be,
Yeah.
there's something blocking. And for me, in my case, it was those perfectionist thought patterns. So
Mm-hmm.
just becoming aware of, okay, I'm not where I want to be. Why could that be? Not sort of beating
Right.
ourselves up about it, but sort of, okay, let's take this apart and start being curious. Why is not this not working? And by looking at the sort of the perfectionist behaviors, I mean, when I sort of became aware of them, I was like, I do that, I do that, I do that, I do that, you know.
Mhm.
When we
Mhm.
become aware of that,
Mhm.
and all the cognitive distortions, that the little lies that our brain tells us,
Mhm.
we can really pick them out.
Can I ask you, can I request you to break it down into a more granular way so that it's more understandable? Like when we talk about perfectionist behavior and the cognitive dissonance, can you give us an example to help us understand this better? For a layperson who's not
Yes, sort of. Well, so for example, a perfectionist will be sort of, they often will like vague goals.
okay,
Okay, so because very high expectations. So
yeah,
the goal is vague, and also there's
mm-hmm,
this sort of sense of, well, if I don't manage to do it, if I'm not
mm-hmm,
perfect at this goal, then
mm-hmm,
it's the excuse is already there, you know.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that would be a sort of a vague goal. And then
mm-hmm,
the cognitive distortion would be sort of, yeah, that the brain is telling you, sort of, you should be achieving this sort of, you should be fluent by now in the language. That would
mm-hmm,
be the
yeah,
cognitive distortion, you know? But that is such a vague goal. What does fluency even mean? You know, sort of,
okay,
and what does sort of fluency mean? What does by now mean in comparison to what?
mm-hmm,
Do you see?
mm-hmm.
So we're really having to get the brain, ourselves, to get our brain to be specific,
Yeah,
you know?
that sounds a little bit like a SMART goal, teaching the brain to set SMART goals for
In a
yourself as
way,
well,
yeah, yeah, totally, yeah.
right?
So,
Yeah. So, how do people begin their recovery journey? Since you walked the path, tell us, like, if I want to, it's not about starting the recovery journey. I think for a lot of perfectionist people who are struggling because of their
yeah,
perfectionism, I think one of the biggest challenges is they say we're going to start off, or we say we're going to start off, but you can do it for 2 days, and the third day it's like a diet. You just fall off the bandwagon like
yeah,
so quickly, right? So
mm,
how do we begin? And can you give us a few tips or techniques that can help us sustain our journey of you know
yeah.
getting our perfectionism into neutral gear?
Sort of, what can we do on a sort of daily basis? That sort of idea.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. Right.
yeah. I mean, that's a great point, because I think but where we are with the perfectionist thought patterns is that we lose that self trust in ourselves because we're not
Yeah.
following through.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
there's and we just create self doubt. So I mean, it's difficult. What's helped me?
Mm-hmm.
Basically, what I do is I do a regular sort of thought audit, if I can call it like that, on a daily
Okay.
basis. I just
Okay.
sit down, like that's one of the first things I do in the morning. I sort of
Mm-hmm.
write out my thoughts,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
and I'm sort of, yeah, and it really feels good to take everything out of my head. You know,
Mm-hmm.
sort of
Mm-hmm.
look at them, generally, sort of, pull
Mm-hmm.
them apart or whatever, recognizing certain things that are coming back.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's really helpful, I think.
Okay.
What else would I say? I'd say what helps me as well is having having a plan of action.
Okay.
It sounds funny, but what I do is I know my perfectionism sort of like tendencies, and
Mm-hmm.
so when there's a sort of certain situations that come up, and I know what my brain tells me at that time,
Hmm.
so I have the answer for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so it's sort of having that sort of obstacle plan ready. Okay, I know when this happens that my brain's going to tell me that. What am I going to tell it? You know,
Hmm.
so
Okay.
it's sort of like um, that sort of already sort of beating our brain to it in a way, sort of thing. So that
Okay.
helps me,
Mm-hmm.
and also, yeah, when I things that help me sort of get into the, is this good enough? That's a big
Yeah.
thing with perfectionists. Sort of like, can I
Yeah.
send this out? Is this good enough?
Yeah.
So, what I've done is, like, I have my own little protocol.
Mm-hmm.
I have my little specific questions.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, specific, not vague. Whereas it has to be,
Mm-hmm.
it's there's a definite answer. I can't spin in
Yeah.
over decision.
Yeah.
Like 3 or 4 questions, and I've got them. And
Mm-hmm.
I sort of think, okay, yeah, good, sort of thing.
Yeah.
just to get started on little tips to help move through
But
those
but
things.
but but Kelly, how do we deal with the brain? Because now this is literally us taking on taking on the brain, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, because when you were talking about, putting your thoughts down, right?
Mm,
Like that was something I do. I do it at the end of the day and sometimes the
yeah,
beginning of the day. And I have to be really, really mindful about not letting my brain edit what I'm putting down, because the brain's there. See, the brain
yeah.
is in between, right? The brain is always there. So it's almost like the big brother. So how do you get around the big brother? Can you tell us that?
Well, you see, it's the brain is there's several parts of the brain. We have that sort of the
Mhm.
brain, the they call it the reptilian brain, or the brain
Yeah,
that's sort of
yeah,
protecting us with the survival instinct. But we also have the board of directors part of the brain with the logical reasoning, you know.
right.
So basically, we have to sort of get that part of the brain working for us. And if
Mm-hmm,
we're not doing that deliberately,
mm-hmm.
then the brain loves those automatic thought patterns, doesn't
Yeah,
it? It
yeah,
works on default
yeah,
mode if we're not being
yeah,
intentional. So
yeah.
once we're being intentional and deliberate about what we want, I
Mm-hmm,
keep bringing that whole idea of being specific and
yeah.
intentional. That's what we need
Mm-hmm,
to be doing. So basically, we'll sort of, if we're looking at the thought journal, I'm being
yeah.
intentional about what I've written down. Sort of what is
Mm-hmm,
that telling me about what I need to do today? What keeps
mm-hmm,
coming back here? Sort of
mm-hmm.
it's asking those specific questions, you know?
Right, right. Okay, I think we've had a pretty longish conversation. I mean, this is of course
It's
a
gone so
topic
quick.
that is, sorry.
It's really gone quick. I can't believe we're already at the end.
Well, we can talk more if you want. You and I can keep talking for, we don't have a problem talking at all. And so if you want to talk more brain stuff, I'm very happy to listen and ask you questions and learn in the process. But if you have run out of steam for now for a life, then we can kind of wind up the conversation. We've
Yeah.
had some really fantastic conversations and comments and engagements and insight in the feed. I want to thank everybody who's listening, and I want to thank everybody who's been, who's just been so vocal and so involved in this conversation. Thank you very, very much. If you have any questions for Kelly, please feel free to put it in the chat, because as you can see, Kelly thinks it's gone by too fast, and she's happy to take some more conversation. Right. So Kelly, thank you so much. If you have any last words, I hand the floor is yours.
Well, no, just thank you for having me, Rekha. Really lovely to be here. And yeah, I just what the intention for today, I think, was to sort of take perfectionism from a different outlook and sort of
Yes,
not be in the resistance, and how
yes,
to get our brain on board with us
yeah, yeah.
to help us rather than to heed us in a way.
Yeah, I think for me, the reason I was very keen on having this conversation is because every time I see something about perfectionism, particularly in the context of the inner critic or the imposter syndrome, right? Because perfectionism is the gold standard for both of these syndromes, and I always feel that we are being called to make a choice. It's either
Definitely.
perfectionism or not, or flawed, right? And it's either perfectionism or progress, but it doesn't have to be in my, I mean, in my books, that's not how it works. You
Mm,
need to just know how to be very realistic and specific, and you have to know how to let go. That's the way I see it. And I
mhm.
do think we should aspire for excellence to whatever extent it means in that moment.
Yeah, yeah,
Not,
I
not
agree.
hold excellence as a vague, it's like Atlas shrugged. Atlas is carrying this burden on his back.
That's the
It
thing,
shouldn't
isn't
be that.
it? Yeah,
Yeah,
it's being able to be specific between what is sort of striving for perfection, that sort of vagueness, or what does doing my best look like?
yeah,
What's
yeah.
getting the brain to focus on that, you know?
No, I think also one of the things that worked for me greatly in terms of managing my perfectionism was to also look at how was it serving me.
Mm,
Because a lot of times the outcome is directed externally. It's very externally referenced. It's to serve somebody else. But the minute I started saying, am I happy with what I've written? Am I happy with the talk I've done? Am I happy with the lives? Even the lives that I started, when I started doing these lives, every time I switched off, I wouldn't be able to look at the recording for like 24 to 48 hours, because I used to think, oh my God, I could think
Mm.
of everything that went wrong.
Yeah.
And 2 days later, I would look at it and say, yeah, it's not as bad as I thought it was. So I had to actually start teaching myself to enjoy it. And,
Mm.
to really be in a space where even if nobody showed up, I was
Yeah.
happy with the conversation. For me, that
Yeah.
internal referencing what made a big difference in defining perfection for that moment and just for
Yeah.
that moment.
Yeah. No, I think you've pinpointed something really interesting. We have to be specific. Well, I keep saying I've said this 10,000 times, specific, but applying it to the specific moment, isn't it?
Yes.
So sort of like the way I sort of encourage myself when I'm feeling sort of is like, okay, this is my job. I post on social media. This is part of what I do. It's sort of like normalizing it and
Yes.
reassuring the brain, sort of thing. This is normal. There's nothing to worry about. We have to sort of
Yeah.
calm the brain, don't we?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's also a lot about sitting with it and experiencing it, not
Mm,
running away. Because a lot of times when we don't like, when we think we've done something that isn't okay or good enough, we then try to run away from it.
yeah,
And then we try
yeah,
to, and it's all elements of it. So I think it really goes down to like what you mentioned of really getting down and intimate with who we are inside
mhm,
and understanding what's going on inside of us, and then
mhm.
saying, how do I make this work for me?
Yeah, exactly. That's it. Totally. Mm,
Right.
yeah.
Anyway, I think we have come to the end of the hour. I can see a lot of people, not end of the hour, end of the half hour. I can see a lot of people saying, I love the conversation, but I've got to run. And I think that's a sign for us to also
No problem.
wind up for the evening. Thank you very much, Kelly, for joining me. This has been such a delightful conversation. And I think we should look at some more conversation topics, because we really need to get the brain angle onto a number of
Yeah,
things and
yeah,
see how we can help ourselves do better. So,
definitely.
any last words for the audience before we sign out?
Just thank you to everybody who was able to pop by today and contribute as well. I didn't always see the comments, but thank you for contributing as well. It was great for you to be here. And yeah, love talking, sharing our thoughts on perfectionism today. Really good.
Yeah, and just in case, if you're watching this video or you are going to watch this video after the live and you want to get in touch with Kelly, Kelly's very active on LinkedIn. I met her on LinkedIn, and then, our friendship picked up from there. But Kelly is available on LinkedIn. She posts amazing content out there, which is packed with tips on how to help your brain navigate through challenges and obstacles. Do look her up. Do reach out to her if you need any specific, support with any specific requirements. And once again, thank you so much for joining us.